The Galactic Union's prison ship, Indomitable, orbited Earth like an indifferent god staring down at a chaotic anthill. Inside its metallic halls, a group of alien soldiers lounged in their ready room, their laughter echoing off the cold, unyielding walls. Lieutenant Varric, a towering Silic with armored skin and a serrated jaw, slammed a clawed hand on the table, drawing attention as he recounted yet another tale of Earth's criminals. "They're pathetic," Varric sneered, his voice a low growl that still managed to drip with mockery. "You should have seen the last one, a supposed gang leader. He tried to bribe us with a shiny trinket he called a Rolex. I crushed in my hand, and the fool begged for mercy." The others burst into laughter, their collective amusement vibrating through the room. Trooper Jex, a slender Zorvian with shimmering blue skin, leaned back in his chair, a wicked grin curling his lips. "Humans think their criminals are terrifying. They have no idea what terror truly is. Put one of their so-called kingpins in the Ulthrax pits, and they'd be crying for their mothers within minutes." The room erupted again, the soldiers' camaraderie fueled by shared disdain. To them, Earth was a backwater planet, its inhabitants clever enough to join the Union, but laughably primitive when it came to matters of warfare or crime. The humans who dared break the laws of the Galactic Union were little more than pests, easily crushed under the Union's heel. The heavy hiss of the door interrupted their revelry. Captain Draylen strode in, his dark red scales glinting under the harsh overhead lights. His piercing yellow eyes swept across the room, silencing the laughter with a single look. Draylen was a veteran of countless campaigns, and though his face bore the scars of battles long past, his expression carried an air of perpetual boredom. "Enough," Draylen said, his voice calm yet commanding. "We've received a new prisoner. High priority." Varric raised a skeptical brow ridge. "Another human?" Draylen nodded. "Earth's authorities handed them over earlier today. A special transfer." Jex smirked. "Special? What? Did they finally catch someone who knows how to tie their shoes?" Draylen ignored the comment and tapped a control panel on the wall. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the profile of the new prisoner. The room went quiet as the soldiers read the name displayed in bold letters, Yelena Markova. Beneath it, an Earth-given nickname, Baba Yaga. "What's that supposed to mean?" Varric asked, squinting at the screen. Jex leaned forward, his grin faltering slightly. "It's an Earth myth. Some kind of boogeyman, I think. They tell stories about it to scare their children." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, a crack in the soldier's veneer of confidence. The image on the hologram showed a woman with sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen, and a calm expression that exuded menace. Her record scroll below, detailing a career of unspeakable violence, assassinations, disappearances, dismantled crime syndicates. "She doesn't look like much," Varric said, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. "She doesn't need to," Draylen replied. "Earth authorities called her the most dangerous human alive. Apparently, it took them years to catch her, and even then, they only managed it by turning half of her own crew against her." The unease in the room deepened. Soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. When the door hissed open again, all eyes turned to the entrance. Yelena Markova, flanked by two heavily armed guards, stepped into the room. She was tall for a human, her frame lean and honed like a blade. Her wrists and ankles were bound with energy restraints, but she walked with a calm, deliberate stride, as if the bindings were little more than an inconvenience. Her expression was unreadable, her dark eyes scanning the room with the precision of a predator assessing its prey. The guards halted in the center of the room, and one of them stepped forward. "Prisoner 13, designation Baba Yaga, delivered as ordered." Draylen approached, his gaze meeting Yelena's. For a moment, neither moved nor spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken challenge. "You're quieter than most humans I've met," Draylen said finally, his voice low and even. Yelena tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. and you're louder than most corpses I've made." The room froze. The guards stiffened, their grips tightening on their weapons. Even Draylen, unflappable as he was, blinked in surprise. Varric's serrated jaw opened, ready to hurl an insult, but Draylen raised a hand, silencing him. "Brave words for someone in restraints," he said, though his tone betrayed a flicker of caution. Yelena didn't respond. Instead, she let the silence stretch, her gaze sweeping across the room. Each soldier she looked at shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny, as if she could see every weakness they tried to hide. "Take her to the high-security block," Draylen ordered, turning to the guards. "Double the usual precautions. I don't want any mistakes." As the guards led Yelena out of the room, the soldiers watched in uneasy silence. The door hissed shut behind her, and the tension in the room remained, an invisible weight pressing down on them. "Baba YGA," Jex muttered, breaking the silence. "What kind of criminal gets a name like that?" "A dangerous one," Draylen said. "And if you're smart, you'll remember that." Varric snorted, though his earlier confidence had dimmed. "She's just another human. Bind her, cage her, and she's nothing." Draylen's gaze lingered on the door for a moment longer before he turned back to his soldiers. "We'll see." In the quiet that followed, no one laughed. The ship's alarms blared, slicing through the stillness of the Indomitable like a razor. Red emergency lights bathed the halls, casting jagged shadows along the metallic walls. Soldiers rushed to their stations, weapons drawn and eyes darting nervously. In the chaos, Captain Draylen stormed into the control room, his crimson scales glinting under the strobe-like flashes. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the cacophony. Lieutenant Varric stood hunched over the central console, his clawed fingers tapping furiously at the controls. His serrated jaw was clenched tight, and a rare glint of fear flickered in his usually defiant eyes. "She's gone," he growled. "Yelena Markova. She's out of her restraints." Draylen's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. She was under maximum security." Varric slammed his fist against the console, sending a deep dent through the surface. "She tricked the guards. One of them went in her cell, and before he could react, she had his weapon and disabled the energy field." Draylen's mind raced. Yelena's reputation hadn't been built on brute strength alone. She was a master manipulator, a tactician who exploited every weakness she found. If she had already escaped confinement, she was far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. "Lock down all sectors," Draylen ordered. "Seal the exits, activate motion sensors, and send squads to sweep the ship. She won't make it far." Meanwhile, Yelena moved through the dimly lit corridors with the precision of a phantom. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold metal floor, and every shadow seemed to embrace her as she slipped past surveillance cameras and patrolling soldiers. Her mind was a symphony of strategy, every step calculated and purposeful. Her eyes caught a flicker of movement ahead, a squad of 3 soldiers rounding the corner, their plasma rifles raised. Yelena ducked into a nearby maintenance alcove, pressing her back against the wall. She listened, her breathing steady and controlled. She couldn't have gone far. One of the soldiers muttered, his voice tight with fear. "I don't like this. It's too quiet. Keep moving." Another snapped. "She's just a human. We have the firepower." A metallic creak interrupted him. The soldiers spun toward the sound, but it was too late. Yelena struck with the speed of a viper. She sprang from the shadows, disarming the nearest soldier with a single, brutal twist of his wrist. His rifle clattered to the floor, and before he could cry out, Yelena delivered a precise blow to his throat. He crumpled, gasping for air. The second soldier raised his weapon, but Yelena was already moving. She dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him and driving her elbow into his temple as he hit the ground. The third soldier hesitated, the barrel of his rifle trembling as he tried to aim. Yelena's gaze locked onto his. "Run." He didn't need to be told twice. She picked up one of the fallen plasma rifles and checked its charge. Satisfied, she slung it over her shoulder and continued down the corridor. Time was her greatest enemy now. The ship was massive, But it wouldn't be long before Draylen's forces closed in on her position. Back in the control room, Draylen watched the surveillance feeds with mounting frustration. Every camera that should have shown Yelena's movements had been disabled or diverted. She was systematically blinding them, turning the Indomitable's own security systems against its crew. "She's playing with us," Varric muttered, "herding us like cattle." Draylen's claws tapped rhythmically against the console as he considered their options. Yelena wasn't just trying to escape. She was making a statement. She wanted them to know she was in control. A sudden burst of static crackled over the ship's intercom. Then, a voice, calm, measured, and chillingly familiar, filled every corridor. "You thought you understood fear," Yelena said. "You laughed at Earth's criminals, mocked our strength, and now you cower in your own ship." The soldiers froze where they stood, the weight of her words pressing down like a suffocating fog. "I'm coming for you," Yelena continued. "And when I do, there will be no mercy." The intercom went dead, leaving only the distant wail of the alarms. "Enough of this," Varric roared. "Send all squads to the central hangar. We'll corner her there." "She won't go to the hangar," Draylen said, his voice cold and certain. "She knows we'd expect that." "No, she'll target the ship's heart." Varric frowned. "The reactor?" Draylen nodded. "If she takes control of it, she can threaten to destroy the entire ship. She won't bluff, either." Yelena had already anticipated this move. She had memorized the ship's layout during her brief confinement, noting every weak point and potential escape route. The reactor core was heavily guarded, but Yelena didn't plan on a direct assault. Instead, she slipped into a ventilation shaft, crawling through the narrow tunnel with practiced ease. The hum of the reactor grew louder as she approached, its energy pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat. When she emerged from the shaft, she found herself in a dimly lit maintenance bay overlooking the reactor chamber. Below, a squad of soldiers stood at attention, their weapons trained on every entrance. Yelena studied the scene, her mind already formulating a plan. She spotted an exposed junction box near the ceiling, an Achilles heel in the ship's otherwise flawless defenses. She aimed her plasma rifle and fired. The bolt struck the junction box, sending a cascade of sparks raining down. The lights in the reactor chamber flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. Soldiers shouted orders, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of confusion. Yelena used the cover of darkness to descend into the chamber, moving with the lethal grace of a shadow. One by one, she incapacitated the guards, her strikes swift and merciless. Within minutes, the chamber was silent again, save for the steady hum of the reactor. Yelena approached the central control console and accessed the ship's communication systems. She activated the intercom once more. "Captain Draylen," she said, her voice carrying a deadly calm. "You have a choice. Surrender now, or I take the ship apart piece by piece." In the control room, Draylen clenched his fists. "She's cornered. She won't escape." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at the edges of his certainty. Yelena Markova wasn't just a criminal. She was a force of nature, and she had just begun her hunt. Captain Draylen stood in the command center, his gaze fixed on the darkened monitors. Yelena Markova had reduced his ship to a vessel of fear, its once proud soldiers now little more than scattered prey. The steady hum of the reactor echoed through the walls, underscoring the tension that hung heavy in the air. Draylen clenched his jaw. Surrender wasn't an option, but neither was underestimating her again. "Varric," he said, turning to the hulking lieutenant, "assemble the remaining squads in the central corridor. She's driving us toward the reactor. She wants us there." Varric's fists tightened, his pride still bruised from their earlier failures. "Let her come. We'll crush her this time." "Not if we keep thinking like that," Draylen snapped. "We've fought wars. She's fought survival. That's the difference." The weight of his words settled over Varric, who gave a reluctant nod. "Understood." Draylen surveyed the dwindling number of troops left at his command. Confidence had bled out of them with each step Yelena had taken through the ship. Fear now lived in their eyes, replacing arrogance with desperation. The captain knew that fear was a weapon, one she wielded with terrifying precision. A sudden metallic clang reverberated through the corridor outside. The soldiers froze, weapons trembling in their hands. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential ambush. Draylen stepped forward, his claws flexing against the cold floor. He wouldn't give in to the terror she had sown. "Hold your ground," he barked. "She's alone." "We're not." Silence followed, stretching too long. Then the lights flickered, a momentary pulse that bathed the ship in darkness before returning with a faint, flickering glow. That was all Yelena needed. From the shadows, she moved like a blade slicing through fog. The first soldier barely had time to register her presence before she struck. A sharp twist of his rifle arm, followed by a swift blow to the back of his head. He crumpled without a sound. The others turned too late. Yelena was already gone, slipping back into the shadows. Panic erupted. "She's toying with us," a soldier shouted, his voice cracking. "Focus," Draylen ordered, but the command came too late. The soldiers broke formation, scattering down separate corridors in search of safety that didn't exist. Yelena struck again. Another soldier fell, this time with a disarmed rifle clattering to the floor. Her movements were surgical, each step calculated to sow chaos. She didn't need brute strength. She had fear on her side, and it was winning. Varric roared in frustration, charging toward the fading sounds of combat. His massive form barreled through the narrow halls, his claws scraping sparks against the walls. He caught a glimpse of Yelena's retreating figure and gave chase. Yelena led him deeper into the ship, her steps light and swift despite the weight of pursuit. She knew Varric's type, brute force driven by pride. He would follow her without thinking, blinded by the need for revenge. And when he reached her, she would be ready. The corridor opened into the reactor chamber, a cavernous space filled with the hum of energy. Massive conduits snaked along the walls, feeding power to every part of the ship. Yelena stopped at the far end, turning to face Varric. He slowed, chest heaving, eyes burning with rage. "You think you're clever, human? All you've done is corner yourself." Yelena's lips curled into a faint smile. "Cornered? No, I chose this place." Varric lunged, his claws aiming for her throat. But Yelena moved with the precision of a dancer, sidestepping the blow and driving the butt of her rifle into his ribs. He grunted, but didn't falter, swinging again with brute strength. This time, Yelena ducked low, sweeping his legs out from under him. Varric hit the floor with a thud, but he rolled quickly, using his momentum to spring back to his feet. Blood dripped from a split in his armor, but his fury only seemed to grow. "You'll regret this," he snarled, advancing again. "No," Yelena said softly. "You already do." Varric charged once more, but Yelena had already anticipated his move. She dodged to the side, sending him crashing into a nearby conduit. Sparks erupted as his claws pierced the metal, and he roared in pain. Before he could recover, Yelena struck a final time, a sharp blow to the back of his neck. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Yelena turned as Captain Draylen entered, his plasma rifle aimed directly at her chest. Unlike Varric, his rage was tempered, controlled. "It's over," he said, though his voice carried no triumph. "Surrender now, and I won't have to kill you." Yelena tilted her head slightly. "You still think you're in control, Captain?" Draylen's eyes flicked briefly to the fallen Varric, then back to Yelena. "I know what kind of monster you are, but even monsters bleed. Monsters are just what you make us," Yelena replied. "You underestimated me because I'm human. That's your first mistake. Your second is thinking you can still win." She took a step back, and Draylen's finger tightened on the trigger. "One more move, and I'll..." The reactor's core pulsed suddenly, its energy level spiking. Draylen's eyes widened as he realized what she had done. During the fight, Yelena had rerouted the reactor's power. Its energy now surged dangerously, moments from overload. "If you shoot me," Yelena said calmly, "the reactor will breach. You'll lose your ship, your crew, and your life. Or you can let me go, and I'll stabilize it." Draylen's mind raced. He was a soldier trained to fight to the bitter end. But this was different. He hadn't just lost control of the ship. He'd lost control of the narrative. Yelena had turned fear into her weapon, and she wielded it with precision. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. "You've made your point." Yelena nodded, her gaze never leaving his. With practiced efficiency, she approached the reactor console and entered a series of commands. The core's pulse slowed, its energy returning to a stable state. When she turned back, Draylen was still watching her, a mixture of frustration and reluctant respect in his eyes. "You let me leave," Yelena said. It wasn't a question. Draylen hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Go. But know this, if we meet again, I won't hesitate." Yelena's smile was faint, but it carried a weight that made his scales prickle. "You'll never see me coming." With that, she disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving only the hum of the reactor behind.